Chapter 1. Salahaddin is worried. Salahaddin was sitting in his office with his coat off. It was the month of May in Cairo, and it was very hot. Salahaddin stood up and turned on the fan. He was a young man, only 28 years old. He was not very tall and quite thin. His black hair was cut very short. Salahaddin's office was in the center of Cairo. It was in a large building behind the Nile Hotel. It was a small office, and Salahaddin's name was not on the door. Not many people knew that he was a detective, but he was not an ordinary detective. Inspector Salahaddin protected all the antiquities of Egypt. Salahaddin was waiting for an archaeologist called Mr. Pearson. Pearson had been in Egypt for 6 months. He had been working in a valley in the south of Egypt. Pearson had been looking for antiquities. He had come back to Cairo a few days ago and was leaving Egypt soon. But Mr. Pearson had not come to Salahaddin's office. Every archaeologist had to see Salahaddin before they left Egypt. Salahaddin was worried. Pearson had not come yet. Salahaddin picked up the telephone and rang the number of Pearson's hotel. "Nile Hotel," said a voice. "Can I help you?" "Can I speak to the manager, please?" said Salahaddin. Salahaddin waited for a few moments. Then he heard the manager's voice. "Can I help you?" said the manager. "Yes," replied Salahaddin. "My name's Salahaddin-e Noor. I'm a police inspector. I want to speak to Mr. Pearson." "Do you mean Mr. Pearson, the archaeologist?" asked the manager. "Yes," replied Salahaddin. "I'm sorry. You can't speak to Mr. Pearson, sir," said the manager. "Oh," said Salahaddin in surprise. "Why not?" "Mr. Pearson is dead," replied the manager. "He was found dead in his room this morning. Mr. Pearson was murdered." Chapter 2. The Missing Box. Salahaddin put on his coat and quickly left his office. It was much hotter outside in the street. A hot, dusty wind was blowing between the tall buildings. Salahaddin jumped into a taxi. The streets were full of cars, and the taxi moved slowly. It took a long time to get to the Nile Hotel. A policeman was standing at the door of the hotel. "I'm sorry," said the policeman. "No one is allowed into the hotel." Salahaddin showed the policeman his identity card. The policeman took Salahaddin to his chief. Luckily, Salahaddin knew this officer. It was Inspector Ahmed, a school friend of Salahaddin's. Ahmed took Salahaddin upstairs to Pearson's room. Pearson was lying on the bed. There was a knife in his chest. "Why are you interested in this man?" Ahmed asked Salahaddin. "Do you know him?" "His name is Pearson," replied Salahaddin. "He's an archaeologist. He was working in the south. He was leaving Egypt soon, and I wanted to see him." "Why was he murdered?" Ahmed asked Salahaddin. "I don't know," replied Salahaddin. There were some boxes standing against the wall. Salahaddin pointed to them. "Perhaps there's something valuable in these boxes," said Salahaddin. "We must open them." Ahmed brought in 2 policemen and they started to open the boxes. Salahaddin looked carefully round the room. There were some papers on the table beside the bed. Salahaddin picked them up. There was a map under the papers. On the map were the words, "Valley of Zar." "These may be important," thought Salahaddin. "I'll take them with me and look at them later." Salahaddin folded the papers and the map and put them carefully in his wallet. By this time, the policeman had opened the boxes. There was nothing important in them. The boxes were full of spades and other things for digging. "There's nothing important or valuable in these boxes," said Salahaddin. "We must speak to all of the hotel staff. Perhaps one of them noticed something unusual." The manager brought the staff to Ahmed and Salahaddin. They asked each person many questions, but they did not learn anything important. Then Salahaddin had an idea. "Who carried these boxes to this room?" he asked the manager. The manager brought back 2 porters. "Did you carry these boxes into this room?" Salahaddin asked the porters. "Yes," they replied. "How many boxes were there?" asked Salahaddin. 6 boxes," replied the first porter. "I carried 3, and my friend carried 3. Salahaddin looked at the boxes. There were 6 of them. No one had taken a box. "Wait a moment," said the second porter. "You're wrong. There were 7 boxes. You carried 3, I carried 3. "But that makes 6 boxes, not 7, said Ahmed with a smile. "You can't count." "I can count," replied the porter. There were 7 boxes. Mr. Pearson carried one into the room himself. It was a heavy box, but it was smaller than the others. "That is the box which is missing," Salahaddin said to Ahmed. "There's something valuable in that 7th box. When we find the 7th box, we'll find the murderer." Chapter 3. The taxi driver Ahmed and Salahaddin left Pearson's room and went downstairs. They sat down and the manager brought them some coffee. "How can we find the 7th box?" asked Ahmed. "I need your help," replied Salahaddin. "How can I help you?" asked Ahmed. "The murderer took the box with him," said Salahaddin. "It was heavy and it's hot today. The murderer did not carry the box very far. Perhaps he took a taxi." "Perhaps he had his own car," said Ahmed. "We don't know," replied Salahaddin. "But perhaps he took a taxi." "That's possible," agreed Ahmed. "And you want to find that taxi. But how can I help you?" "You can send out a police message on Radio Cairo," replied Salahaddin. "That's true," agreed Ahmed. "What shall I say in the message?" "When did Pearson die?" asked Salahaddin. "About 10:30 this morning," replied Ahmed. "Then here's the message," said Salahaddin. "The police want to speak to a taxi driver. This taxi driver was near the Nile Hotel at about 11 o'clock this morning. A man got into his taxi. The man was carrying a heavy box. The police want to speak to the taxi driver as soon as possible." "Good," said Ahmed. "I'll put out this message immediately." "Most taxis have radios," said Salahaddin. "Perhaps a taxi driver will remember a man with a heavy box." "I'll get back to my office," went on Salahaddin. "When anything happens, let me know." "I'll telephone you immediately," replied Ahmed. It was now late afternoon. Outside on the street, it was still very hot. Salahaddin got into a taxi. Luckily, there were few cars and the streets were almost empty. He soon arrived back in his office. Salahaddin turned on the radio. He heard the message. It was repeated after 15 minutes. Salahaddin waited. Suddenly, the telephone rang. It was Ahmed. "We've been lucky," said Ahmed. A taxi driver is here in my office. A man with a heavy box got into his taxi near the Nile Hotel. At what time? Asked Salahaddin. At 11 o'clock this morning, replied Ahmed. Do you want to speak to him? Certainly, replied Salahaddin. I'll come round to your office immediately. Ahmed's office was quite near. Salahaddin walked there. The sun had gone down, and it was becoming cooler. The taxi driver was waiting in Ahmed's office. He was a fat, happy-looking man. He was also intelligent. Salahaddin took out his notebook and asked the taxi driver some questions. At what time did this man get into your taxi? Asked Salahaddin. A few minutes before 11 o'clock, replied the taxi driver. He got in quite near the Nile Hotel. Was he carrying anything? Salahaddin asked. Yes, replied the taxi driver. A heavy box. And what did he look like? Asked Salahaddin. He was tall with broad shoulders, replied the taxi driver. He had fair hair. He spoke Arabic, but he was not an Arab. Perhaps he was Swedish. Salahaddin thought for a few moments. Then he asked the taxi driver another question. This man spoke Arabic, did he? Asked Salahaddin. What kind of Arabic did he speak? What do you mean? Asked the driver. Did he speak Arabic like an Egyptian? Asked Salahaddin. Oh no, said the taxi driver. He spoke like a Lebanese. Where did you take this man? Said Salahaddin, continuing his questions. I took him to the railway station, replied the driver. He wanted to get there before 12 o'clock. 12 o'clock midday, said Salahaddin quietly. What train leaves Cairo at 12 o'clock? The express train for Alexandria, said the taxi driver immediately. I know all the trains. The express train leaves Cairo at 12 o'clock and arrives in Alexandria at 2:30. Salahaddin had been lucky. He had found out some important facts. He looked at the notes in his book. Pearson's murderer? X? What does he look like? Tall and broad fair hair. Perhaps X is Swedish. Where is X going? Went to Cairo railway station before 12 o'clock. Perhaps X is going to Alexandria. Why Alexandria? Alexandria, Beirut? Many ships go from Alexandria to Beirut easy to get a heavy box on a boat, not so easy to get a box on aeroplane. Remember, X speaks Arabic like a Lebanese. Perhaps X is going to take a boat to Beirut? Chapter 4. Boat to Beirut. It was now after 7 o'clock in the evening. The train from Cairo had arrived at Alexandria at 2:30. Perhaps Pearson's murderer was already on a boat to Beirut. We must phone Alexandria, said Salahaddin to Ahmed. Salahaddin picked up the telephone. He asked for the police at the docks in Alexandria. After about 10 minutes, the telephone rang. It was the call to Alexandria. This is Salahaddin E.I. Noor speaking. I'm a police inspector and I want to speak to your chief. The chief of the dock police came to the telephone. Salahaddin asked some questions and wrote the answers down in his notebook. Here are his notes. A tall man with fair hair arrived at the docks at 6 o'clock. Man was carrying a heavy box. He had a Swedish passport. All the papers already sent to Cairo. Man said the box was full of books. Box was not opened. Police do not open every box. Two boats had left Alexandria after 4:30 p.m. A boat left at 6:30 for Beirut. Its name, Syria. Man said he was going to Beirut. The police did not see him getting on the boat for Beirut. Salahaddin put down the telephone and looked at his notes for some time. Then he spoke to Ahmed. Pearson's murderer has gone to Beirut, he said. I'm sure of that. Then we can send a message to the boat, said Ahmed. No, we won't do that, said Salahaddin. We're not really certain. Many men have fair hair and many men carry heavy boxes. I must meet him. I must speak to him. But how can you do that? Asked Ahmed. It's too late now. The boat has already left. I can get to Beirut before him, replied Salahaddin. Today is Monday. The boat won't be in Beirut until tomorrow evening. I can take an aeroplane. And the plane takes only 2 hours, said Ahmed. That's right, said Salahaddin. I'll take a plane tomorrow morning and I'll be in Beirut before midday. That's a good idea, said Ahmed. You can meet this man on the docks at Beirut. And now I must go. I've a lot to do, said Salahaddin. I must book a seat on the aeroplane and get a ticket. I'll see you later. Thanks for your help. Goodbye. Chapter 5. The Black Cat. Salahaddin got home very late. It was nearly midnight and he was very tired. But his work was not yet finished. He took some pieces of paper out of his wallet. They were the pieces of paper from Pearson's room. Salahaddin sat down and looked at Pearson's notes. The pharaoh Ankuten. This pharaoh did not live long. He died when he was still a boy. Where was Ankuten buried? Ankuten was going to the Sudan when he did it. The Valley of Zar is beside the road to the Sudan. Was Ankuten buried in the Valley of Zar? What was buried with Ankuten in his tomb? Was there a cat buried with Ankuten? There are many old stories about a black cat. Ankuten loved black cats. When he died, a black cat was put in his tomb. But this cat was very unusual. It was made of gold. Its eyes were diamonds. There was a collar of diamonds round its neck. Is this story true or not? Why was the cat covered with black paint? Fear of robbers. Black paint hid the gold and diamonds. A cat painted in thick black paint did not look valuable. Questions that must be answered. Is Ankuten buried in the Valley of Zar? Is there a black cat in his tomb? Is the black cat made of gold? Or is it made of wood? Are the stories true or false? Salahaddin read the notes again. He asked himself some questions. Did Pearson find the tomb of Ankuten, he asked himself. Did he find a black cat? And is the black cat made of gold? There was a reason for Pearson's death. Was the black cat the reason? There are too many questions, thought Salahaddin. I must find some answers. The answers are in the missing box and it's probably on its way to Beirut. I'll be there tomorrow.